An important tool in financial management is the ability to measure whether or not you are meeting your financial goals. We can do this in CenterPoint by creating a budget and using reports that measure actual versus budget information on them. There are 3 different versions of CenterPoint. There's CenterPoint Accounting, CenterPoint for Agriculture, and CenterPoint Fund. I'll be using CenterPoint Accounting for this demonstration. However, I will point out the differences in the other products where they exist. To start a new budget, we can go to Reporting Tools and Budgets, or Setup and Budgets. You'll see that I have some budgets already created on mine. To start a new budget, though, we would click the New button. When you click the New button, a Budget Properties screen comes up, and the first thing you're going to need to do is to name the budget. And I'm going to call mine Alpine Sports. And I'm going to put a year on it, 2025. I actually create a different budget for each year, but that's not necessary. You can keep expanding your budget out. And when you do a budget, you could actually budget for more than 1 year at a time. So you can include more than 1 year in this. I've just chosen to have a separate budget for each year. When you're doing a budget, you can select either just one company, or if you happen to be using our CenterPoint Fund product, the company is equal to a fund. So this would say fund. So you can only budget for one company or fund at a time. I've chosen a date range of January of 2025 to 12/31 of 2025, so 1 year. But like I said before, you can have a budget that spans more than 1 year. And later on, if I wanted to extend this budget out, I would come back to this property screen and I would extend the budget out. Now, there is a video on how to go ahead and extend the budget out. When you do draw up a budget in CenterPoint, it includes 3 reports. It includes a flow of funds, a balance sheet, and an income statement. And because it includes a balance sheet, that balance sheet needs to have some beginning figures. So we usually pull over some actual figures to start out that balance sheet. And I'm going to pull mine from December of 2024. Well, likely I'm maybe making this budget in October of 2024, and I haven't gotten to December of 2024 yet. I probably will still choose the period right before the beginning of this budget, and then as actual data occurs for those months that haven't occurred yet, it'll update the balances on the budgeted balance sheet. You can on your budget, when it does come up, you'll have those 3 reports. And on each of the reports, you're going to have a list of your accounts. That list will just be the account name unless you select to include the account number by putting a check mark in the box on the screen here. And then after you choose to include the number, you'll now have the ability to sort it by either the account name or the account number. You can set one budget per company or fund as the default budget for that company or fund. And what that does for you is in our standard reports, we have some variations of the income statement and the balance sheet that allow you to see budget versus actual information. And if you don't select a budget that you want to do that comparison to actual against, it'll automatically select the default budget for that company or fund. And as soon as you mark one of them as your default budget, any one that was previously marked as the default budget will be unchecked. By default, any new budgets that you create are going to be marked as active. Later, when you no longer need to see that budget on the list, you can mark it as inactive or you can delete it. At the bottom of the screen is the ability to import other budgets into this budget. So if you've previously created a budget for the different profit centers that you have, for those of you using our CenterPoint Fund product, those profit centers would be equal to your department. Maybe you've created a different budget for different locations. If you create separate budgets for different areas of your company and you then want to pull those into another budget, that is for the whole company, you can do that at the bottom here in the imported section. And that's what, when we first came into CenterPoint, you saw that I had some budgets already set up. I set up budgets for my different profit centers. So now I want a budget for the whole company. So I'm going to import those other budgets by clicking on that Add button, selecting the budget, and importing it. And I'm going to do that for each one of the budgets that I want to bring into this budget. Okay, so I've gone ahead and imported those. Later on, if I make a change to that imported budget, as I highlighted at the bottom here, I would see this update button become enabled, and then I could update the figures in this budget by just clicking on that update button. If I want to remove an imported budget from this budget, I would just highlight the budget and click the remove button. If I clicked OK at this point, it would draw up my budget. But before I do that, I'm going to go to the second tab at the top called the Entry Mode tab. And there's basically 3 entry modes for budgeting. Even though it looks like there's 4, there's 3 actual entry modes. The first one is what we call Journal Entry Offset to Cash. And what that means, when you have that set, it means that every entry that you enter into another account is going to automatically offset your cash. So for example, if I put in $100 for utilities expense, it'll increase that expense by $100, but it'll also decrease my cash by $100. You might want that kind of an entry if you're budgeting for balance sheet activity, or at least monitoring the level of cash in your bank account throughout your budgeting period. Okay, so that will adjust the level of cash or the amount of cash on the balance sheet. The second entry is, or the second entry mode type is called Open Entry. When using Open Entry, it doesn't offset to anything. So that same $100 on utilities expense, if I'm using Open Entry, will not take and decrease cash. It's only going to increase my utility expense. You might use that kind of an entry if you're not budgeting your balance sheet, if you're just really worried about having an income statement budget. The last option is detailed transaction entry, and rarely do we use detailed transaction entry on all of our accounts. We'd probably just use it on some accounts. Specifically, very often we'll use it for things like the sales of inventory. When you're selling something like a purchased inventory, or even for those of you who are agriculture or raised inventory, when you sell that inventory, there's more than just 2 accounts being affected by that transaction. Usually you'll have the inventory account itself and a cost of goods account. You'll also usually have a revenue account that gets affected by that transaction, and then of course the cash account. So for those transactions, we would use detailed transaction entry, or we might want to use detailed transaction entry. You don't have to. That's why we have a fourth mode. The fourth mode, called Use Account Entry Mode, allows you to pick and choose which kind of entry mode you want to use on an account-by-account basis. So if I use Account Entry Mode, the default for most accounts is going to be Journal Entry Offset to Cash, but it does allow me to change it for other accounts. If I pick Use Account Entry Mode, Journal Entry Offset to Cash, or Detailed Transaction Entry, the system's going to require me to choose the bank account that I want to choose as that offset account. And I could come back here and change which account if I want some entries to go to one account and other entries to go to a different account. Okay, I can change that default account, but I do need to select one. If I choose Open Entry, of course, it just grays that field out because we're not going to be offsetting to that bank account. At the bottom of the screen are some entry defaults, and depending on what version of CenterPoint you're using, these management details might be labeled differently. For CenterPoint Accounting and CenterPoint for Agriculture, this is going to be labeled as a profit center. For those of you using CenterPoint Fund, it's going to be labeled as a department. Location is going to be for those of you using CenterPoint for agriculture, is going to be equal to your production center. Tracking number 1 for those of you using CenterPoint for agriculture is going to be equal to production year, and tracking number 2 is going to be equal to production series. Okay, so those are going to just be label changes. This section, if I choose a profit center or a department in that box and then click OK, from that point forward, every entry that I put in will be allocated to that detail. Okay, so this is all discussed in a separate video, but I do want to point out that they're here. We're going to leave ours as blank for right now, but if you wanted to do budgeting by different profit centers and locations, this is where we can set those defaults. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to draw up the 3 reports, the flow of funds, the balance sheet, and the income statement. And you can see that my budget has started out with some figures. The reason why I have figures for my income statement accounts is because I chose to import those other budgets. So back underneath File and Properties, which gets me back to that screen where I set all of my options, I chose to import other budgets at the bottom of this screen. Therefore, I'm seeing those figures come into this budget. For my balance sheet, I'm seeing figures on the balance sheet because I also selected a beginning balance period. So these beginning balances are from that beginning balance period, but they've been adjusted for the transactions on these different budgets that I also imported. So you're going to be entering in all of your budget information on your flow of funds. The flow of funds has on it all of the income statement accounts at the top. And then after the income statement accounts, it does allow you to put in budget figures for any of your balance sheet accounts. And again, these columns would all be 0. You see that some of them are 0, but they would all be 0 if you had not imported any other budgets into this budget. From this point forward, I could either put in manual entry of budget information into CenterPoint, or CenterPoint does have options to allow you to import budget information from an Excel spreadsheet. And there are different videos on either annual entering in budget information or importing budget information that you'll want to view. To exit out of budgeting, I could click on the X in the top right corner.